The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 39th Day. Only in 1299, Philip the Fair would finish the war with England. The truce agreed by Benedict Gaetani had been developed morosely, and the warring nations were unable to yield in their intentions to restart the struggle. Finally, through the Treaty of Montreal, the same ended, due to the own conditions of the time. Edward I, King of England, would marry with Margaret, sister of Philip IV, while Edward II, son of English, would engage with Isabella, a 4-year-old girl, who was the only daughter of the French. Isabella would inherit the Duchy of Guyenne, but the English would not tread French territory by the moment. The next year, Philip occupies the county of Flanders with his troops and closes the strategic enclosure. In the year 1300, Philip the Fair completed the 2 first steps of the strategic way of life of the regal function. He realized the principle of the occupation on the territory of the kingdom, and applied the principle of enclosure. And the fields were prepared for the rational exploitation of the agriculture and animal husbandry. The Hyperborean strategy then reaches its highest degree of development, and there is almost no power on the earth able to oppose the king of the blood, and the mystic nation. Has sounded the hour of the charismatic state, in which the king and the people are a single voice and a single will. The arrest of the Bishop of Pamiers, which will outbreak the last reaction of Boniface VIII, will clearly show the real existence of the charismatic state. Bernard de Cesset, Bishop of Pamiers, was in reality a Gallican spy. They entrusted him the mission to investigate the existence of a secret society in the Languedoc, where allegedly belonged councillors of Philip the Fair. After a patient work, he reached to a stunning conclusion. In fact, a wicked conspiracy existed against the Gallican Church. On it converged the Cathars, who reappeared surprisingly organized, the spiritual Franciscans, recently excommunicated, and some members of the Order of Preachers, especially Spaniards. Disputes between heretics and inquisitors were clearly simulated, and was easily to warn that behind the plot was the hand of Philip the Fair, who protected all the imputed ones in person. Before being discovered by the Lords of the Dog, and then arrested and accused of high treason, the Bishop of Pamiers sends his report to Boniface VIII, who demanded to the King of France his immediate release. This was not possible without running the risking to expose more details about the Dominicanis, so he was formally accused of being involved in a seditious plan at the service of the Crown of Aragon. He was going to be judged by a civil court, which was in total contradiction with the canon law, which prohibited to the bishops to appear in the secular court. The necessity for the Bishop of Pamiers to obtain testimony against Philip the Fair, and the challenge which meant in the time the civil prosecution of a bishop, caused the anger of Boniface VIII. His response would be the bull Esgiltophilis, dispatched to France in December 1301, with others of lesser importance. On it, Boniface criticized violently the legal and administrative reform to the king. "Return, my beloved son, to the path that guides to God, and from which you have missed, either by your own guilt, or by the instigation of malicious advisers. Above everything, don't let you to be persuaded that you do not have a superior, and that you are not subjected to the Pope, who is the head of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Such opinion is senseless, and who encourages it is an infidel already segregated from the flock of the Good Shepherd. Those evil advisers, of course, would not be other than the Dominicanis." Then Boniface expresses that, with the finality to consider the disorders caused by the misbehavior of Philip, and to find a fair remedy to it, he convened all the bishops to a council in Rome in November of 1302. During the same, the king, who is invited to be present, will be prosecuted for his crimes, and called to the correction. Philip IV, of course, not only would not present, but he would prohibit to the bishops to leave France without his consent. The crimes that were imputed to the king in the Esgiltophilis would seem as today perfectly sovereign. They accused him to have changed the monetary system. to create taxes unknown until then, to tax the rents that the Church of France guided to Rome, to impose national frontiers to their subjects, etc. Copies of this bull were read and burnt in public in all France, generating a popular movement of indignation against the theocratic despotism of the Pope. As I told you, Dr. Setonal, with the skill to fill this, appeared the opportunity to exhibit the mystical nation, with this new structure of the state that was patiently created the Dominicanus Legists. This demonstration was realized exactly the day, April 10 in 1302, at the Cathedral of Notre Dame, Paris, and can be considered as the first constitution of the modern French state. There were gathered the representatives of all the French provinces, reason why that Congress was called of the General States. But, what was really new, consisted in the three orders that composed the assembly. It means, representatives of the nobility, the clergy, and of the cities. These last ones, present for the first time in a council chaired by the king. It must be placed at the time of the 14th century, to appreciate on its real dimension the innovation which meant to include with noble and ecclesiastical representatives the plebeian class, and not as a democratic right, extorted by force to sanguinary tyrants or weak kings, but by the real recognition that the people participate in the sovereignty, such as affirms the Hyperborean wisdom. Naturally, in the third order, were represented the different strata that integrated the mystical nation, mainly the new and vigorous bourgeoisie, composed by traders, merchants, and yeomen, the artisans and builders, free peasants, etc. Outstanding performance in the organization of such first assembly of the three orders had the Lords of the Dog, especially the first three named, Pierre Flet, Robert of Artois and Count of St. Paul. Pierre Flet spoke to Parliament in the name of the King, and his words are still remembered. The Pope has sent us the letters in which he declares that we must submit unto him as to the temporal government of our kingdom refers, and that we must abide not only the crown of God, as was always believed, but also the apostolic see. According to this statement, the pontiff convokes to all the prelates of this kingdom to a council in Rome, to reform the abuses which he said that have been committed by us, and our functionaries in the administration of our states. You know, in other hand, in which manner the Pope impoverishes the Church of France, giving it his free will behovs, which incomes pass to foreign hands. You ignore that the churches are overwhelmed by tithes demands, that the metropolitans don't have now the authority over their suffragans, neither the bishops over their clergy, which in one word, the court of Rome, reducing the episcopacy to naught, attracts to himself power and money. It is necessary to curb these outrages. Thus, we beseech you, as lords and as friends, to help us to defend the liberties of the kingdom and of the church. In what treats about us, if it is necessary, to sacrifice for these double motive our goods, our lives and, if the circumstances demand it, the ones of our children. The position of Philip the Fair was supported in collective form by the General States. The nobles and the cities subscribed quiet letters, in which they refused in hard terms the accusations against the king. They denounced, at the same time, the intention of the Pope to convert the kingdom in an ecclesiastical feud, but the relations went poisoned more and more. During the assembly, the most atrocious crimes attributed to Boniface VIII had been made public. The usurpation of the papal investiture, murder, simony, heresy, sodomy, etc., and such lack of moral authority, from who pretended to become supreme sovereign, was divulged through all the corners of the kingdom by the publicists of Philip the Fair. So, the people were with their king, and would not react adversely before any initiative that would have as finality to limit the ambitions of Boniface VIII. In regard to the bishops, they were in front of the following dilemma. If they concurred to the council, would be considered personal enemies of the king. They could be accused of treason and, just as occurred to the Bishop of Pemir, judged by civil courts. But, if they not, they would be excommunicated by Boniface VIII. Nevertheless, even by the terrible retaliations, that had promised the Pope to those who don't present in Rome. The majority of the bishops were in the side of King, to whom they considered as a worthier representative of Catholic religion. Only the Gauleans, and the spies of Philip IV, would go November to the council. It means, only 36 would go of a total of 78 French bishops. But, before the council, in July 11th, of 1302, an unfortunate event came to tarnish the mystical court of Philip the Fair. To suffocate a general revolt that had sprouted in Flanders, Philip sends a powerful army of knights, which results annihilated such day, in the Battle of Courtrai. And in the battlefield remains forever the invaluable Pierre Flet, Robert d'Artois, and the Count of St. Pol, 3 lords of the dock whose performance was the main factor of the success of the strategy at Philip IV. Other Dominicanus even more fearsome than the 3 defunct, Willem of Novgorod, Ingarand of Marigny, and Willem of Plazen. During the council, no resolution was taken against Philip IV, due to, as in the fable, no mouse would exist, disposed to put the sleigh bell to the cat. Nevertheless, the fury of Boniface has no limit when he knew that in France has been confiscated the goods of the present bishops and a judgment of high treason has been promoted to them. Thus, in November 18th, he published the bull Unam Sanctam, which would be considered as the most complete juridical exposition ever realized in favor of the papal and priestly absolutism. Incapable to take other more effective measures against Philip the Fair, the Gauleans tried to initiate a juridical polemic about the matter of the spiritual power and the temporal power. For this reason Boniface insists, once again with the analogy of the 2 swords. The tactic consists in to obtain to be accepted, as a syllogism, the truth is that the spiritual sword is above the temporal sword. Once admitted it is continued with the identification of the Pope with the spiritual power and of the King with the temporal sword. The conclusion, evident and logic, is that the King must submit to the Pope, because in this manner is accomplished the will of God. The idea was not new, but now was elevated as the official dogma of the Church, and its explicit rejection would imply the sin of heresy. Let's remember, Dr. Setonal, the main conclusions of the bull. In first place, it affirms the existence of just one Church, denying the recent accusation of the Dominicanus, consisting that, inside of the Gaulean Church, heretic and satanic, from which Boniface would be one of the chiefs. Thence the name of the bull, Unam Sanctam Ecclesiam. In this unique church, we're obeyed to believe, because out of it there is no salvation nor forgiveness for the sins. And this unique church is analogous to an organic body, in which the head represents Jesus Christ, and also the Pope, the vicarius of Jesus Christ. Therefore, in this lonely and unique church there's just one body, only one head, and not 2 heads as the monster has. It means, Jesus Christ, and the vicarius of Jesus Christ, Peter and the successors of Peter, are the head of the church. For these reasons, the temporal and spiritual swords are subjected to the power of the church. The second must be used for the church, and the first by the church. The first, by the priest. The second, by the hands of the kings and knights, but to the will and conformity to the priest. This word, however, must be subjected to the other, and the temporal authority to the temporal power. The king mustn't interfere in the issues of the church, either in what treats about its rents, due to, if he do such thing commits a great mistake, he interferes with the spiritual power, and the Pope is obeyed to judge him and to call him to the order, but without, on the contrary, exists anyone over the earth that can judge the Pope. We see it clearly in the contribution of tithes, either in the glorification or in the sanctification, in the reception of such power and in the government of the things. Because, as the truth testifies, the spiritual power must institute and judge the earthly power, if this is not correctly exerted. Thus, if the earthly power errs, it can be judged by the superior power. But if the supreme power really errs, this can be only judged by God, not by any man. It means that all the accusations of Boniface VIII, exposed during the Assembly of the General States, and transcribed in the letters to the cardinals, lack of value, due to, they come from those who don't have the spiritual capacity to judge the acts of the Pope. Only God can do it. And to believe the opposite is manifested heresy. Therefore, whoever resists to this power ordained by God, also resists to the law of God, unless that he pretends the existence of two principles, as the Manichaean. So we declare, we say, and define, that it is entirely necessary for the salvation, that all the human creatures be subjected to the High Roman Pontiff. Porro subes remino pontificate, omni hymeni creator declaramus, decimus et divinamus eminens, de necessitate salutis. The glove has been thrown to the King of France, and was clearly adverted, in the words of the bull, the intention to excommunicate him. In the next 4 months, Philip the Fair, and the Dominicanes, celebrated many secret meetings. The prestige of Boniface VIII has fell lower than ever in France, after the bull Unam Sanctam. Is the moment, proposed the lords of the dog, to depose the Pope. Once beheaded, the guillotine dragon will be easier to disband the body. However, the argument of the illegitimacy of his investiture doesn't have the unanimous support of the University of Paris, necessary request to substantiate the claim, or imposition of a new papal election. Gains strength, instead, the idea to present an accusation of heresy. The heresy, according to the canon law, is causal of demission of the Pope, and is supported with historical antecedents. Of course, that to prove such accusation, and to derive from it the substitution of the Pope, was necessary the scheme of a general council. Philip IV is then disposed to force the recall to a council to judge the heretic behavior of the Pope. He entrusts to enforce there the number of his national bishops. The lords of the dock will accompany him, orchestrating a campaign of denunciations of heresy against Boniface VIII, as a manner to morally influence over the bishops, and also over the nobles, and the cities. Willem of Novgorod, and Willem of Plagen, offered to officiate as accusers, being the first elected to perform a secret mission in Italy. What would not avoid to initiate the campaign of accusations, begging in public to the king to defend the Christians from the evil of Boniface VIII, and the second to accuse openly to the Pope. In March 12 of 1303, Willem of Novgorod, before the Council of Ministers of the King, reads and signs a manifest, which is immediately copied and published in the whole kingdom. It said, "The glorious Prince of the Apostles, the blessed Peter, talking in the name of the Spirit, said us that, as in past times, as in coming times, would emerge false prophets that will besmirch the path of the truth, and those who, in their greed, and through misleading words, will traffic with us, following the example of that Balaam, who, satisfied with the praise of the iniquity, to impose the punishments and to utter his threats, Balaam had a beastly creature that, gifted with human speech, proclaimed the nonsenses of a false prophet. These things, which were announced by the father and patriarch of the church, we see now with our own eyes realized letter by letter. In regard to the truth, there is seated in the chair of blessed Peter, that master of lies, who, notwithstanding of being maleficent, malfeasant, in every possible form, is called beneficent, Boniface. He didn't enter through the door, in the flock of our Lord, as shepherd and cottager, but as raider and thief. Even being alive the real husband of the Church, Celestian V, he dared to injure the wife by means of illegitimate embraces. The real husband had no participation in this divorce. In fact, according to what the human laws say, nothing more opposed to the acquiescence than the error can't marry who, while the worthy husband lives, has besmirched the marriage with the adultery. Thus, as all what perpetuates against God, is an injury which is committed against everyone, and in which such great crime concerns, the testimony of the first, who comes must be received, even being the one of the wife, although being of a shameful woman. I, therefore, as the beast that, through the power of God, was gifted with the voice of a real human, to make him reprove the nonsenses of the false prophet, who reached to curse the blessed people, I direct unto you my supplication, the most excellent of the princes, our Lord Philippe, by the grace of God King of France, who, after the example of the angel that showed the naked sword, to comply with the justice, you must oppose to this other, and most fatal Balaam, and prevent the consummation of the damage that he is preparing against the people. The damage consisted in the excommunication of Philip IV, and the liberation of all the French Christians, to comply with the vow of fidelity, with which the kingdom would remain in question, and could be rightfully conquered, for whom the Pope authorizes such the plans that Boniface VIII was preparing, and that the spies of Philip IV informed periodically. On the other hand, as an effect of the Manifest of Novgorod, no official measure was taken, but promptly the people started to refer to the Pope as Maleficent VIII, what explained why the Gascons enjoy in France, of the same fame, that in Spain have the Andalusians,